Hi there, this is Carl Irwin with another Blender tutorial. This is going to be another segment in the PBR Viewport tutorial series that I've been working on concerning some of the new capabilities that we have in Blender version 2.78. I know that there's a lot of things that are going to be implemented in version 2.8, which should be coming up not in the too distant future. It's still a ways out there. That's probably going to render most of what we're talking about in this tutorial scissors completely irrelevant. So the good news is that the physically based kind of viewport experience is probably going to be improving drastically within the next couple of releases. And from what I understand, in not too distant a future, we should be able to get some builds of the 2.8 branch available to start testing. So I don't really know when that's going to be, but I do have in good faith a good word that that should be coming fairly soon. Okay, so however, in the meantime, we're going to look at how to continue using the capabilities that are new to Blender, specifically the ability to map within the default viewport, box map type reflections, and of course the diffuse maps that we created in the very first episode of this tutorial series. So this tutorial is going to focus, now that we've discussed the development of different types of node groups for quick implementation of physically based type viewport rendering. And again, this is more for in the interest of creating high-speed rendering OpenGL type viewport renders. This isn't necessarily physically based rendering in the sense that what we see in the viewport is exactly what we would see when we hit the internal or the cycles render button. Okay, that's a completely different kind of perspective when thinking about physically based rendering. If you know my channel and you know some of the initiatives that I take, I'm interested in making high quality renders using OpenGL directly from the viewport and completely sidestepping the ray traced render engines entirely. So that's what this is going to focus on, getting good viewport type renders that are pretty passable. This is an example of a model using the techniques that we've discussed already, and a couple of other techniques that we haven't discussed that we're going to go over. I just want to point out where I got this model. This is from TurboSquid. It's a free model. And the materials that I'm using aren't exactly like this. In fact, the model, the way it comes, does not have all of the materials assigned properly as you import it into Blender. So I had to do a little bit of work to kind of assign the materials in the right place. It gives you actually a black and white kind of pattern image, and then you can fabricate whatever color combinations you want from that. So it doesn't really come as is in this photograph. It comes with a little bit of work needing to be done. So, batteries not included. You have to do a little bit of work to get it to look quite right. But anyway, free model. You can find this here by this user. So I've attributed the creator here with providing the model. And if we go back to our file, let's take a look at what's going on in here. Now, I can't recall. I think that this model came with an ambient occlusion pass. I don't recall. I created an ambient occlusion pass myself from this. I baked one out to test out a couple of ideas, but ultimately what I settled on is I'm using in here not the screen space ambient occlusion at all, but rather a baked ambient occlusion that is baked to vertex paint. I just wanted to demonstrate how powerful the vertex paint ambient occlusion is. Now, it's not perfect. It is awful glitchy whenever you render it out, but as a subtle effect, if you're not going to use it very heavily, it satisfies the need pretty well to generate fairly passable ambient occlusion. So I want to touch on that very quickly before we then look at a much simpler model. So let's look at the complexity of this one first. The first material we're looking at is this yellow fabric here, and what I'm using is the node groups that we created in our initial tutorials, and I'm going to show you again how to import these into a new file. But you can see that we have the black and white texture that comes with the model. This is what it would look like mapped on. Again, this has to be shadeless. All of your textures and materials must be shadeless in order to make this work. We're going to use the light mask node group that we created in a previous tutorial to generate our masks for shadow effects. Everything else needs to be shadeless. We're also going to be using our diffuse textures, our box map diffuse and our box map reflection in order to generate the world lighting. So everything needs to be shadeless to start with. This is the black and white. Now what I did is I plugged this into a ramp, a color ramp, so that the black would represent this kind of a darker yellow, and the white would represent this kind of a lighter yellow over here, and the output of that looks like this. I'll try that again. The output of that looks like this. So this is our new coloring using that color ramp. Then what I did is I ran this through my diffuse lighting node group. Remember that we created these various node groups in the previous tutorial. This is the diffuse lighting node group that will apply the world map from this equirectangular projection that you see here. I generated a box map that is blurred to generate diffuse lighting. I also generated a box map for reflection as well, as you can see on the initial tutorials. That node group gives me an output that looks like this. Okay, so you can see already that the world lighting automatically gives us quite a bit of a realism to it, a bit of a verisimilitude to our lighting here, just by adding that one thing. We still don't have any ambient occlusion on there, and we don't have any shadows that are appropriate, but we do have kind of the influence of the lighting that exists in the world space from that equirectangular projection. Okay, then in addition to that, we run it through the shadow mask node group that we created. This will apply using the 4 OpenGL lights that I have in the scene that are kind of randomly set in there to emulate the origination of some of the lighting in the scene. This is not really authentically based. I just kind of put 4 lights in there very quickly to kind of simulate lighting coming from different directions. Some lights are a little bit more powerful than others, but these are all some sun lamps. And once we put it through that node group, we get this output that looks like this. And now we can see the shadows appearing. Of course, all this is also applied to the ground plane. The ground plane is its own object with its own materials as well, and it has all of those materials applied. The next thing that we're going to do is we want to generate a little bit of a specularity, but we want the specularity to kind of make it look like one of the colors, either the dark or the lighter color. I think the lighter color is the one I did. But the lighter color looks more of a silky kind of reflection to it, whereas the darker is a little bit more of a satin kind of a finish that absorbs more light. So what I did is I ran the whole thing through my specularity node, and this is a specially adjusted one for this material. You can see here that I've adjusted the specularity. It kind of represents this. Again, you can see that it might be hard to see, but it gives a little bit of a shiny sheen to everything. If we go into that node group, and if you recall when we made this, there's a number of settings in here that can be changed to balance out the reflectivity from the reflection box map versus the diffuse box map to get us just the right kind of specularity. So you can play around with those settings and also play around with the Fresnel map that's on there to change those settings. I'm not going to get into how this works, so you can see that tutorial for yourself. But anyway, we apply that specularity. Then what I did is I brought that specularity output from the chain into a mix node, and I'm mixing it with the original output without the specularity. and then I get kind of a more subtle version of it, so I can control the amount of specularity by using that mix node. I have it set to 0.5. Okay, so just kind of tame back that sheen a little bit. And then what I did is I brought that output into another mix node. Now this mix node is going to mix my mixed specularity output with the one that has no specularity. And what I'm going to use for my map is the original black and white image. So the parts that are white, which would be the lighter color, is going to take the part that has specularity, and the parts that are black, which would be the darker yellow color, will not have any specularity. And that output looks like this. So this is the final output. Now, it might be hard to really see, but if you look close, you can see that only the lighter color is giving us kind of that shimmery sheen kind of look. And the darker color is a lot more absorbent. Okay. The next thing I did is I put this into a color curve that darkened it down quite a bit. And I'll show you what I'm going to do with this. This color curve here just takes the light side way down and gives me kind of a darkened version of it. And what I'm doing is I'm mixing this in with the regular one in this mix node, and I'm applying an ambient occlusion effect. Now this ambient occlusion effect is actually a baked ambient occlusion that is baked in as a vertex paint layer. It looks like this. Now you can see if you look close, it really is kind of dirty. It's pretty blocky. See what that looks like in there? But it still gives us all of the essence of what the ambient occlusion should be. I can see these deep shadows in here in the crevices. And the cool thing about using the vertex paint to do it, by the way, in order to do this, what you do is you go to the Render tab. I need to go to the Blender Internal Render. If you come down here to the Bake settings and select Ambient Occlusion, and then you can click on Normalize, so it gives you a grayscale output, white and black, and then click on this Bake to Vertex color. Now what you want to do is you want to do this first before you do anything else, because I found that once you get a complex number of materials applied to different things, this is all one piece of geometry. Now not all the vertices are linked together, but I created this in Blender, or rather imported it into Blender as one solid piece rather than as different pieces as the model comes, just because I figured it'd be easier to work that way. It actually ended up making it harder to work with, but because it's one piece of mesh, I found that I needed to bake my vertex paint layer first before I started adding all of these other materials. But anyway, you bake it and you'll get this kind of an output, and it bakes incredibly quickly because it's baking just to vertex paint rather than to an image. So it's very low resolution. In fact, it's not really any resolution because it's not really an image at all. Okay, so I did this, and then what I did is I applied a color curve to it, and I just kind of lightened it up a little bit. So this is my color curve adjustment. So it kind of chokes back the shadows a little bit. It brings up the white color a little bit more so that I can have a little bit more of my authentic material being applied in the open, well-lit spots. So this is my ambient occlusion layer. Now I use this as the mask in my mix. So I'm going to put, as the dark shadows, I will use this this output here, which is my input that has a color curve adjustment on it, bringing the lights way down. This will become the shadow. And then on the bottom, I will use the regular output. So that output then ends up looking like this. So you can see that now I have ambient occlusion applied, and it's very subtle. It's not very, very stark. Now if I look really close in some areas, you'll see some of those little blocky pieces. But if it's applied very subtly, this is a pretty passable way to get some ambient occlusion. And now I can create a mist layer, or I can use my subsurface scattering node group that we looked at in the last tutorial without having to deal with my screen space ambient occlusion. I also don't have to worry about the resolution issues with my screen space ambient occlusion and getting some of those interlaced blocky edges. Okay, I can render very quickly like this, and I don't have all of the blockiness that I normally would have using the screen space ambient occlusion. So anyway, using vertex paint, very, very powerful, baking your ambient occlusion layer to that. Okay, anyway, I do the same thing for all of the other materials. So I did the exact same kind of process with the wood, and I applied various node groups in order to get my final output. I have a specularity on here. I made its own version of specularity, this one here, which applies kind of a more of a higher sheen reflection to the wood than what I have on the on the fabric. I did this for all of the different materials in there. Okay, so this is how it works. Now the cool thing about this is that I can automatically get my world lighting to apply just by changing my world textures. So just to demonstrate that, if I go over here to my materials, I have imported my diffuse material and my reflection material. These go into my node group, so if I change my textures here, it will automatically update my materials here. So let me go to my diffuse, and I'll go to the texture slot, and I'll load in a new texture. Let me find another one here. We'll go to the atrium, and the atrium looks like this. So I'll select my atrium diffuse. I'll load that in. You can already see that it's changing kind of the color and nuance of it. And then we'll go back here and go to my reflection, go to the texture, and I'll load in my atrium reflection map over here. And then just for reference, let me go to the world texture, and I'll load in my atrium equirectangular projection. Okay, so this is the new setting. Now, the last thing I need to do is I need to get my lights to be set. So I do have kind of a brighter light source coming from here, and I have a brighter light source coming from the back. So all I want to have in here are two lights. If I turn off my only render, I want to have this forward light, I want to have this back light, but I can turn off these side lights here. And now I'm left with just the forward light and the back light, and they should kind of match each other. So I'll probably come over here and grab my backlight and set that to, actually I'll probably leave it at 0.5, and I'll go to my front light and set that also at 0.5. Darken it down a little bit. So we have this very dark sort of atmosphere. It has all of the color of the scene in there, the deep contrasting shadows. Maybe I'll bump those up to 1 on both sides, see if that makes it a little bit better. So apart from the light levels, I automatically have all of my coloring properly being applied using my diffuse texture. So if I go here to my camera view, I can render out my frame, and it takes a second or less. And there I have a full render, which has a more physically based sort of application of my world colors based on an equirectangular projection from which I created some box maps. Anyway, that's how it's applied in the complex sort of scenario. What I want to do is I want to walk you through kind of a simple setup of how this can be put together. So what I'm going to do is we'll open up another project that I have. Let me see here, file open recent. And this is should be a recognizable model. This model is from Andrew Kramer's Video Copilot website. It's from a free model pack that he put out a while back with some Star Wars types of models in it. And what I did is I took his very excellent model and I mucked around with it. And what I did is I made a very simple model, which is just one piece of geometry with no moving parts, and then I baked this texture to low resolution. Okay. Now his model comes with an ambient occlusion pass, and specularity pass, and normal pass. It's got, I think, just about everything with it. What I did is I just made this one very generic shadeless texture that is mapped to one piece of geometry. Okay, so this is a really basic model, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to make this look a lot better than what it is, even with the low resolution and without all of those other passes. So let's see if it can be done. What we want to do is we want to get our materials from our PBR workup into this new project. So the easiest way I found to do this was to go to the append section, and then what you want to do is you want to go to your file that has those nodes applied to an object in it. Okay, so I actually made a file that had all of my nodes from my original tutorial series file applied to one object. They're all attached to that one object. And if I go to the object, I can pull this in. I'm going to grab the material test. It's actually a Suzanne that has all the material node groups on it, and all of the material slots in it, including the diffuse and the reflection. And then I'm going to grab this light here. It says construction site. It's a single light that matches the preloaded textures that are in there. So I'll select both of those, and I will import them. Append from library. So here I have my Suzanne, and you can see that Suzanne has some world textures applied to it. You can see it's all the construction site materials with the specularity, the diffuse, everything is in there, okay? And then I also have my light source over here. Now I want to get rid of my default lamp. I'm not going to need that. My BB-8 is a shadeless texture. It's very important that you begin with a shadeless texture material. Okay, when we're using this kind of technique, we have to use shadeless textures to begin with. Now, what I can do with my Suzanne, now that I have a Suzanne in here, you'll notice if I go to my node editor and I go down to the add and I go to group, you'll see I have all of my node groups that I created through my tutorial series. Now, these have all been cleaned up. I've put proper names on them. I've routed them properly. I cleaned them up from where we were at in those tutorials. So they're all ready to plug and play. Now I can take Suzanne, my material test, and I can just turn her off. What I want to do is let me get my background image in there. So I'll go to my World tab, and I'll go to the texture slot. I'll hit New, and Image or Movie. I'll go to Open, and I want to go to that construction site folder here, and I'll load up my equirectangular projection. And I want to set this to horizon. We don't need blend on. And we want to set the coordinates to equirectangular. This is something we've covered in the previous tutorials. I'll go to my World tab and I'll hit Real Sky. And then over here, I want to make sure I'm set to GLSL shading. And then I can turn on World Background. And here I have my my world view going on. Okay. So now what I want to do is I just apply my node groups to my object to make it look nice. So let's go to BB-8 and we'll go to the material slot, and we'll just use this material here as the basis for BB-8. Now, one thing I do want to do is I want to load in a couple of other material slots, and in the first one I'm going to put on that I will have also my materials from my other file automatically loaded in because I imported that Suzanne. I want to load in the diffuse material, and then I want to also load in the reflection material. If I want to use anything else like the rough reflection, I could do that, but I should only need to use these because the texture slot should be tied into those other materials that we had from the past. Okay, so I only need these. Now with these loaded in, I can change my textures and it will automatically update. Okay, so let's go to my material, and I'm going to enable nodes, and I'm going to call this BB-8. Now, one thing that I did, if I go here to my node editor, it looks like we don't have anything in there. Let me add in an input, material input, and we'll add an output here. And we'll tie the material to the output to get us started. And then in here I'll select BB-8. Now we can see everything we started with. One thing I want to do is I want to put in here a geometry node, because like I said, I didn't create a new ambient occlusion pass. And if I don't want to use my screen space ambient occlusion, this is what that would look like if I enabled it. Turn it up here. You know, I could use that, but then I'm stuck with all of the limitations of that system. If I wanted to use some other kind of ambient occlusion layer, I could, of course, bake one myself, or I could use the one that came with it, but we're going to ignore that. I could use my vertex paint trick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to input a geometry node, and we'll just tie the vertex color to that. I'll go in here and select the UV map that's already on here, and I'll select this slot which I created called AO, ambient occlusion. So over here I actually have a vertex color layer that I created earlier. Now if I go to my bake options over here in my render tab, and I select ambient occlusion for the bake, normalized bake to vertex color, and I hit bake, you can see that this should bake pretty quickly. It will bake in all of my ambient occlusion. Now it looks pretty good. You'll see that there's a few kind of weird discrepancies that might not be useful, like right in here. I don't know what that's all about. Now the cool thing is that this is just vertex paint. If I go to vertex paint mode, and I have a white color selected here, I can just kind of lighten this stuff up. I can just paint over some of those little spots to make them a little less noticeable. So you can clean it up a little bit. You don't have to be stuck with what the output is. You can make it look a little bit cleaner. So just a couple of spots to kind of clean up these little areas. Now with vertex paint, of course, the more vertices you have, the better the paint layer. Now this looks pretty blocky, but as I said, it is only an ambient occlusion mask. So if we use it sparingly, we probably will be able to get away with it. Okay, so that's what I'm going to use for my ambient occlusion. Let's see if we can't get my diffuse colors on here. So let's bring our original texture out here, and we're going to go back to our object mode, and let's import. We'll hit add, go to group. Let's get in here our diffuse lighting. So I'll bring in my diffuse lighting node. This is from my previous tutorials that we imported it with our material test Suzanne. And pretty simple, I'm just going to run my material through it, and then it will come to the output over here on the other side. Oops, come to the output on the other side. And you can see we now have our world lighting applied to it. Okay, so it looks like the colors that are in the environment are actually generating light on our object. You can see, especially in these dark areas here, kind of the blue sky up top. It dullens it up quite a bit. We're going to try to do some things to fix that, but you can see how this has been applied. So right off the bat it looks pretty decent. We need now our shadow, so let's get our shadow in there. We'll add another group, and we'll go to the shadow mask, and we'll drop that in, and now suddenly we have our shadow applied. So you can see the shadow on the back side, light on the other side generated by our OpenGL light that's in the scene. Let me turn on our only render so we can see a little bit better. So already we see the application of our PBR just based on quick plug and play node groups that we've created. Okay, that's what's kind of neat about this. If you make one file, it's very easy to just import those groups into any project. Okay, let's say we want to add our ambient occlusion to the whole thing. So I'll add here very quickly a mix node. And when we do the ambient occlusion, we can do it a couple of different ways. I could put the color on the bottom and make the color on the top a black shadow color. And then I can put my ambient occlusion, my vertex color, into the factor, and it will apply black everywhere. Now that's pretty stark, and it's not really realistic to the color in the scene. So like I did on my last example, instead of using black, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a RGB curve, and I'm going to put my output from my shadow mask into the curve. And then just to look at what we're going to do with it here, I'll put that into the output. So this is the output from the curve. I'm just going to take the lights and drag them way down here to give myself kind of a shadow look, but it still represents the color of the texture and the colors from the ambient light in the scene, the actual scene lighting. Okay, and I'm going to use this as my shadow input on top. and that should give me a more realistic kind of look. And this is what I end up with. Now, if I want to decrease the amount of my ambient occlusion pass, or if I want to choke it a little bit, what I can do is I can add to that an RGB curve. And we'll take a look at this layer by itself. Let's say I want to bring the whites up a little bit more, and I want the darks to be a little bit more contrasted. So one thing I can do is just bring up the center, and we'll brighten up those whites and choke back the darks a little bit. If I want to create more of a contrast, I can add a contrast curve, something like this. So we'll play around with that, and then put that output into our mix node. And the final, oh, if I can get it to connect. The final output will look like this. Okay, so this is very simple, quick plug-and-play application. Now, let's say we want to take this a step further. We want everything to look a little bit better. We want, reflectivity on there. We want some specularity. Let's say we want to add a little bit of specularity to our BB8 real quick. Let me add in here another group. We'll add the specularity node. I'll drop that on there, and you see it's got a lot of shine. Let's decrease this specularity a little bit. It shouldn't be quite so shiny. So what I want to do is I want to rename this. We're going to call this specularity, and actually before I do that, I want to click on this 2 to make it its own user, and then we'll call this specularity body, and we'll tab into it. And let's see if we can't alter this, get rid of some of these really bright highlights. So in order to do that, there's a few ways we can handle it. We can change the curve adjustments back here, or we can just use our Fresnel layer up here. So right now, the really stark highlights are represented by the white color. If we look at that, okay, it's this part out here. I want to see less of those. So what I want to do is go to the white color itself, and I'm just going to bring it down to more of a gray tone. And I want to see a lot less of that in the center. So I'm going to go to my gray side, which is actually the black. I'm going to darken that way down to black, so we get more of the plain diffuse in there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. If I wanted to create kind of a grit map or a grit mask in there, I could import a texture of some kind of, I don't know, gritty or concrete kind of texture, and I could use that also to map this application of this specularity in there. I'm not going to mess around with that right now. We'll just kind of leave it as is. Maybe another way we can do it though, let me tab out of this. Maybe we can find a way to do that. If I go to my original color output, let's see if we can't use this output to generate a bit of a grit mask. Let me add to this a color, hue, and saturation node, and we're going to take this down to 0 to get a black and white kind of image. And then on that, let's add a color curves adjustment, and let's just make a big contrast here. Bring the whites up, bring the darks down. We'll get kind of a gritty looking edge here. So any place that we see the gritty part, we want to have less specularity. We'll say that. And then anywhere that we see the whites, we'll have more specularity. Okay, so this is kind of a quick poor man's grit map. And what we'll do is we'll use this output with a mix node. And we'll put the specularity in the bottom. And then we're going to put the output without the specularity in the top. And then we're going to put the output from this little map that we made into the factor, and then we'll bring this out into the output. So now if you look close, you'll see that that specularity only shows up in some places. which gives a lot more of an authentic kind of look. Looks more dirty. Okay? So that's our output. In fact, what you probably want to do is we would want to move our application of our ambient occlusion outside of that. So why don't we move this node group out here? I'm going to disconnect that. Bring this over here and connect it here. We're going to get the order right here. Bring this through the specularity. Bring this through the top. And let me just slide our nodes for our ambient occlusion over. I think we have everything in order now. So we're applying our ambient occlusion after the specularity. Give a little bit more shadow. And I think that looks pretty good. I think we have everything in there. Let's go back and make sure. So you can see over here where we see gritty edges, we can see that reflection going on, like right in here. Okay. So that's pretty good. Let's say we want to get some of this glass looking a little bit better. Put our ambient occlusion back on again. Let's get this glass looking a little bit better. What we can do is we'll go to our material and we're going to call this body. Then we're going to add another material slot. We'll bump it up. And we're going to put in here body. And then we're going to make it its own user. And we're going to call this lens. Okay, so now if we go to the lens node group, it'll have everything that we put in there already. What we want to do is we want to keep a lot of this, but we're going to change a few things. We want to change the input that's coming into here. We want there to be probably more reflectivity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in here a node group, which is the reflection with GL lights. And we're going to add this way back here, back before, or actually after the shadow mask. In fact, you know, probably the easiest way to deal with this is just to get rid of all of this stuff. So we're going to get rid of the diffuse lighting. Let me select a few things. Box select. All we need actually is our reflection color. Okay. First, before we deal with this, let me apply this to the output, and we need to apply it to the geometry where it exists. So let's tab into edit mode here, and I'm going to select a vertice on the lens over here, and I'm going to select a vertice on this lens over here, and then I'm going to go to select and hit linked, and hope that it only selects the lens areas, and it does seem to do that. So I think we're good to go. And then what I'm going to do is on this lens, I'm going to hit assign. So whatever changes we make here will be assigned only to those areas. So you can see we're applying these lenses. This is going to be really, really easy. What I want to do is get rid of the material input altogether. I'm not going to need it. We're going to keep our ambient occlusion out here, that mask. We're going to get rid of everything else except for our ambient occlusion shadow curve. So we can get rid of all of this. Okay, so all we have is the reflection material node group that we created from a previous tutorial. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add to this a color curves adjustment, and I'll add also to this a hue. Now you can actually change the settings inside of the reflection, but we'll change them on the outside. I'll add to this also a color hue and saturation, And I'm going to take the hue and saturation down to 0.5. And then I'm going to add a dark contrast to this. Bring up the whites. Really dark. Okay, something like that. And then on top of this, what I want to add is we will import also our specularity node group. Put that on there. And if we tab into it, we can put our settings in. So I think our settings are probably pretty good. I might want to tighten in the white a little bit more, and bring up the gray, make it a little bit lighter. Tab out of that. I probably should have made that its own user and put its own name on it, but this is the last thing we're going to do. So, and then we'll bring this out, put it into our ambient occlusion rig that we made. So we're darkening it out with this mask up here, or with this curve. Then we're using our vertex paint layer, and then this final output will go in here. And we're going to mix that dark color onto the lighter color. And there we go. So we created a lens. All right. And this already looks a lot better. So using very simple techniques, we were able to apply our node groups to a pre-made, pretty simple shadeless material that was on there already. Okay, and we were able to map our new materials to the various parts of geometry on this very simple model. Now, again, I would use the more complex model. I'm just showing you that you can take really simple, low-resolution models and get pretty good results there. If I go back to my camera view, so this is, where BB it looks like I can render out a frame, and there he is. So in 1 second, I have a pretty good-looking model here with a pretty realistic looking world lighting going on. And just proof of concept again, all I need to do is change my textures out. So if I go to my diffuse texture and load in a different texture, let's say we go to this one here. We'll have to create that because we imported it. Let's go to, I don't know, Village Overcast. No. Yeah, Village Overcast. Let's try that one. So this is the diffuse. And let's go to the reflection. And use the reflection map. And go to our world. And we'll load in our equirectangular background so we have it for perspective. So that's the background, and in here the light source is actually very diffuse. There's not a clear light source. So what I would probably do is take my light and rotate it so it's kind of facing more down. Move it up. And there you have it. I could change my settings for that OpenGL light in the game engine side. I could also decrease the influence of this light to give me more of the ambient kind of lighting in there. If I go back to my node group for the object, go to the material slots, go to body, and let's say I want to use less of my shadow mask. So I have the shadow mask here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a mix node. And I'm going to mix out my shadow mask a little bit. So I'll drop in the diffuse output into the bottom. I'll put my shadow mask into the top. And I want this to go to all of the places that this output goes to. So there's one over here, there's one over here, whoops, and there's one over here, and that's it. And I can adjust, I would need to do the same thing for the lens, but I can then adjust the amount of shadow mask that I'm using versus the just the ambient lighting by moving the slider. So I can, really customize how my light is going to affect it and how much of the environment lighting I'm going to use. So there you have it. This is kind of the end of the series. I really don't know much more there is to talk about, and quite frankly, it probably won't be very long before a lot of this is irrelevant. But in the meantime, we're able to use kind of these techniques, and you can make a file and fabricate some node groups that are very quick plug and play and get pretty good results directly from the viewport that render very, very, very quickly. Just like this. So full HD resolution in just a second with fairly authentic lighting scheme going on here that represents a real-world equirectangular projection. So there you have it. I'm going to call this the end of the series unless I come up with any other kind of things that we want to look at, or if there's any good recommendations, maybe we can look into some other possibilities. But otherwise, I think I don't really have much more to show you than this. So quick recap, we've generated box maps from equirectangular images. We map those using Blender's capability. We generated some node groups that give us diffuse lighting and also shadow masking. We generated node groups that give us reflection, also refraction. We didn't use any of the refraction here, but we did create that. We also generated a node group that gives us subsurface scattering effects. And then also here we demonstrated how we can apply it to prefabricated models that have prefabricated textures and materials using shadeless material applications and our node groups. So there you have it. Good luck with this, and I wish all of you happy blending.